Chapter 7. From the very first moment we'd met Morley, he'd kept emitting sudden yodels in keeping with our venture. This was a simple yodel-a-hee, but it came at the oddest moments and in oddest circumstances, like several times when his Chinese and German friends were still around, then later in the car, sitting with us enclosed, yodel-a-hee, and then as we got out of the car to go in the bar, yodel-a-hee. Now, as Jaffe woke up and saw it was dawn and jumped out of the bags and ran to gather firewood and shudder over a little preliminary fire, Morley woke up from his nervous small sleep of dawn, yawned, and yelled, "Yodel-a-hee!" which echoed toward Vales in the distance. I got up too. It was all we could do to hold together. The only thing to do was hop around and flap your arms, like me and my sad bum on the Gone on the south coast. But soon Jaffe got more logs on the fire, and it was a roaring bonfire that we turned our backs to after a while and yelled and talked. A beautiful morning, red pristine shafts of sunlight coming in over the hill and slanting down into the cold trees like cathedral light, and the mists rising to meet the sun, and all the way around the giant secret roar of tumbling creeks, probably with films of ice in the pools. Great fishing country. Pretty soon I was yelling yodel-a-hee myself, but when Jaffe went to fetch more wood and we couldn't see him for a while, and Morley yelled yodel-a-hee, Jaffe answered back with a simple hoo, which he said was the Indian way to call in the mountains and much nicer. So I began to yell hoo myself. Then we got in the car and started off. We ate the bread and cheese. No difference between the Morley of this morning and the Morley of last night, except his voice as he rattled on yakking in that cultured, snide, funny way of his, was sort of cute with that morning freshness, like the way people's voices sound after getting up early in the morning. Something faintly wistful and hoarse and eager in it, ready for a new day. Soon the sun was warm. The black bread was good. It had been baked by Sean Monahan's wife. Sean, who had a shack in Corte Madera we could all go live in free of rent someday. The cheese was sharp cheddar. But it didn't satisfy me much, and when we got out into country with no more houses and anything, I began to yearn for a good old hot breakfast. And suddenly, after we'd gone over a little creek bridge, we saw a merry little lodge by the side of the road under tremendous juniper trees, with smoke boiling out of the chimney and neon signs outside and a sign in the window advertising pancakes and hot coffee. Let's go in there. By God, we need a man's breakfast if we're going to climb all day. Nobody complained about my idea, and we went in and sat at booths, and a nice woman took our orders with that cheery loquaciousness of people in the back country. "Well, you boys going hunting this morning?" "No'm," said Jaffe, "just climbing Matterhorn." "Matterhorn? Why, I wouldn't do that if somebody paid me $1,000. Meanwhile, I went out to the log johns out back and washed from water in the tap, which was delightfully cold, and made my face tingle. Then I drank some of it, and it was like cool liquid ice in my stomach, and sat there real nice, and I had more. Shaggy dogs were barking in the golden-red sunlight slanting down from the 100-foot branches of the firs and ponderosas. I could see snow-capped mountains glittering in the distance. One of them was Matterhorn. I went in, and the pancakes were ready, hot and steaming, and poured syrup over my 3 pats of butter and cut them up and slurped hot coffee and ate. So did Henry and Jaffe. For once, no conversation. Then we washed it all down with that incomparable cold water as hunters came in hunting boots with wool shirts, but no giddy drunk hunters, but serious hunters ready to go out there after breakfast. There was a bar adjoining, but nobody cared about alcohol this morning. We got in the car, crossed another creek bridge, crossed a meadow with a few cows and log cabins, and came out on a plain which clearly showed Matterhorn rising the highest, most awful-looking of the jagged peaks to the south. "There she is," said Morley, really proud. "Isn't she beautiful? Doesn't it remind you of the Alps? I've got a collection of snow-covered mountain photos you should see sometime." "I like the real thing myself," said Jaffe, looking seriously at the mountains, and in that far-off look in his eyes, that secret self-sigh, I saw he was back home again. Bridgeport is a little sleepy town, curiously New England-like on that plain. 2 restaurants, 2 gas stations, a school, all sidewalking Highway 395 as it comes through there running from down Bishop Way up to Carson City, Nevada. Chapter 8. Now another incredible delay was caused as Mr. Morley decided to see if he could find a store open in Bridgeport and buy a sleeping bag or at least a canvas cover or tarpaulin of some kind for tonight's sleep at 9,000 feet, and judging from last night's sleep at 4,000, it was bound to be pretty cold. Meanwhile, Jaffe and I waited, sitting in the now hot sun of 10 a.m. on the grass of the school, watching occasional laconic traffic pass by on the not-busy highway, and watching to see the fortunes of a young Indian hitchhiker pointed north. We discussed him warmly. "That's what I like, hitchhiking around, feeling free. Imagine, though, being an Indian and doing all that. Damn it, Smith, let's go talk to him and wish him luck." The Indian wasn't very talkative, but not unfriendly, and told us he'd been making pretty slow time on 395. We wished him luck. Meanwhile, in the very tiny town, Morley was nowhere to be seen. What's he doing, waking up some proprietor in his bed back there? Finally, Morley came back and said there was nothing available and the only thing to do was to borrow a couple of blankets at the lake lodge. We got in the car, went back down the highway a few hundred yards, and turned south toward the glittering, trackless snows high in the blue air. We drove along beautiful twin lakes and came to the lake lodge, which was a big white frame house inn. Morley went in and deposited $5 for the use of 2 blankets for one night. A woman was standing in the doorway, arms akimbo, dogs barked. The road was dusty, a dirt road, but the lake was cerulean pure. In it, the reflections of the cliffs and foothills showed perfectly. But the road was being repaired, and we could see the yellow dust boiling up ahead, where we'd have to walk along the lake road a while before cutting across a creek at the end of the lake and up through underbrush and up the beginning of the trail. We parked the car and got all our gear out and arranged it in the warm sun. Jaffe put things in my knapsack and told me I had to carry it or jump in the lake. He was being very serious and leaderly, and it pleased me more than anything else. Then, with the same boyish gravity, he went over to the dust of the road with the pickaxe and drew a big circle and began drawing things in the circle. "What's that?" "I'm doing a magic mandala that'll not only help us on our climb, but after a few more marks and chants, I'll be able to predict the future from it." "What's a mandala?" "They're the Buddhist signs that are always circles filled with things. The circle representing the void and the thing's illusion, see? You sometimes see mandalas painted over a bodhisattva's head, and you can tell his history from studying it. Tibetan in origin. I had on the tennis sneakers, and now I whipped out my mountain climbing cap for the day, which Jaffe had consigned to me, which was a little black French beret, which I put on at a jaunty angle and hitched the knapsack up, and I was ready to go. In the sneakers and the beret, I felt more like a bohemian painter than a mountain climber. But Jaffe had on his fine big boots and his little green Swiss cap with feather, and looked elfin but rugged. I see the picture of him alone in the mountains in that outfit, the vision. It's pure morning in the high, dry Sierras. Far-off, clean firs can be seen shadowing the sides of rocky hills. Further yet, snow-capped pinpoints. Nearer, the big bushy forms of pines. And there's Jaffe in his little cap with a big rucksack on his back, clomping along, but with a flower in his left hand, which is hooked to the strap of the rucksack at his breast. Grass grows out between crowded rocks and boulders. Distant sweeps of scree can be seen making gashes down the sides of morning. His eyes shine with joy. He's on his way. His heroes are John Muir and Han Shan and Shite and Lipo and John Burroughs and Paul Bunyan and Kropotkin. He's small and has a funny kind of belly coming out as he strides, but it's not because his belly is big, it's because his spine curves a bit. But that's offset by the vigorous long steps he takes. Actually, the long steps of a tall man, as I found out following him up trail, and his chest is deep and shoulders broad. "God dang it, Jaffe, I feel great this morning," I said as we locked the car and all three of us started swinging down the lake road with our packs, straggling a bit, occupying side and center and other side of the road like straggling infantrymen. "Isn't this a hell of a lot greater than the place? Getting drunk in there on a fresh Saturday morning like this, all bleary and sick. And here we are by the fresh, pure lake, walking along in this good air. By God, it's a haiku in itself." "Comparisons are odious, Smith," he sent sailing back to me, quoting Cervantes and making a Zen Buddhist observation to boot. "It don't make a damn friggin' difference whether you're in the place or hiking up Matterhorn. It's all the same old void, boy." And I mused about that and realized he was right. Comparisons are odious. It's all the same. But it sure felt great, and suddenly I realized this, in spite of my swollen foot veins, would do me a lot of good and get me away from drinking and maybe make me appreciate perhaps a whole new way of living. Jaffe, I'm glad I met you. I'm going to learn all about how to pack rucksacks and what to do and hide in these mountains when I'm sick of civilization. In fact, I'm grateful I met you. Well, Smith, I'm grateful I met you too, learning about how to write spontaneously and all that. Oh, that's nothing. To me, it's a lot. Let's go, boys, a little faster. We ain't got no time to waste. By and by, we reached the boiling yellow dust where caterpillars were churning around and great big fat sweaty operators who didn't even look at us were swearing and cussing on the job. For them to climb a mountain, you'd have to pay them double time and quadruple time today, Saturday. Jaffe and I laughed to think of it. I felt a little embarrassed with my silly beret, but the cat operators didn't even look. And soon we left them behind and were approaching the final little store lodge at the foot of the trail. It was a log cabin set right on the end of the lake, and it was enclosed in a V of pretty big foothills. Here we stopped and rested a while on the steps. We'd hiked approximately 4 miles, but on flat good road, and went in and bought candy and crackers and Cokes and stuff. Then suddenly Morley, who'd not been silent on the 4-mile hike, and looked funny in his own outfit, which was that immense packboard with air mattress and all, deflated now, and no hat at all, so that he looked just like he does in the library, but with big floppy pants of some kind. Morley suddenly remembered he'd forgotten to drain the crankcase. So he forgot to drain the crankcase, I said, noticing their consternation and not knowing much about cars. So he forgot to brain the drank base. No, this means that if it gets below freezing tonight down here, the goddamn radiator explodes and we can't drive back home and have to walk 12 miles to Bridgeport and all and get all hung up. Well, maybe it won't be so cold tonight. Can't take a chance, said Morley, and by that time I was pretty mad at him for finding more ways than he could figure to forget, foul up, disturb, delay, and make go round in circles this relatively simple hiking trip we'd undertaken. What you gonna do? What we gonna do? Walk back 4 miles? Only thing to do. I'll walk back alone, drain the crankcase, walk back and follow you up the trail and meet you tonight at the camp. And I'll light a big bonfire, said Jaffe, and you'll see the glow and just yodel and we'll direct you in. That's simple. But you've got to step on it to make it by nightfall at camp. I will. I'll start back right now. But then I felt sorry about poor old hapless Funny Henry and said, "Aw, hell, you mean you're not going to climb with us today? The hell with the crankcase, come on with us." "It'd cost too much money if that thing froze tonight, Smith. No, I think I better go back. I've got plenty of nice thoughts to keep me acquainted with, probably what you two'll be talking about all day. Oh, hell, I'll just start back right now. Be sure not to roar at bees, and don't hurt the cur, and if the tennis party comes on with everybody shirtless, don't make eyes at the searchlight or the sun'll kick a girl's ass right back at you, cats and all, and boxes of fruit and oranges thrown in." And some such statement. And with no ado or ceremony, there he went down the road with just a little hand wave, muttering and talking on to himself. So we had to yell, "Well, so long, Henry, hurry up!" And he didn't answer, but just walked off shrugging. "You know," I said, "I think it doesn't make any difference to him anyway. He's just satisfied to wander around and forget things. And pat his belly and look at things as they are, sort of like in Chuang Tzu." And Jaffe and I had a good laugh watching forlorn Henry swaggering down all that road we'd only just negotiated, alone and mad. "Well, here we go," said Jaffe. "When I get tired of this big rucksack, we'll swap." "I'm ready now. Man, come on, give it to me now. I feel like carrying something heavy. You don't realize how good I feel, man. Come on." So we swapped packs and started off. Both of us were feeling fine and were talking a blue streak about anything. Literature, the mountains, girls, princess, the poets, Japan, our past adventures in life. And I suddenly realized it was a kind of blessing in disguise Morley had forgotten to drain the crankcase. Otherwise, Jaffe wouldn't have got in a word edgewise all the blessed day. And now I had a chance to hear his ideas. In the way he did things, hiking, he reminded me of Mike, my boyhood chum, who also loved to lead the way, real grave like Buck Jones, eyes to the distant horizons like Natty Bumppo, cautioning me about snapping twigs, or, "It's too deep here, let's go down the creek a ways to ford it," or, "There'll be mud in that low bottom, we better skirt around," and dead serious and glad. I saw old Jaffe's boyhood in those eastern Oregon forests, the way he went about it. He walked like he talked. From behind I could see his toes pointed slightly inward, the way mine do, instead of out. But when it came time to climb, he pointed his toes out, like Chaplin, to make a kind of easier flap-thwap as he trudged. We went across a kind of muddy river bottom, through dense undergrowth and a few willow trees, and came out on the other side a little wet and started up the trail, which was clearly marked and named, and had been recently repaired by trail crews. But as we hit parts where a rock had rolled on the trail, he took great precaution to throw the rock off, saying, "I used to work on trail crews. I can't see a trail all meddlesome like that, Smith." As we climbed, the lake began to appear below us, and suddenly in its clear blue pool we could see the deep holes where the lake had its springs, like black wells, and we could see the schools of fish skitter. "Oh, this is like an early morning in China, and I'm 5 years old in beginningless time," I sang out, and felt like sitting by the trail and whipping out my little notebook and writing sketches about it. "Look over there," sang Jaffe, "yellow aspens. Just put me in the mind of a haiku. Talking about the literary life, the yellow aspens." Walking in this country, you could understand the perfect gems of haikus the Oriental poets had written, never getting drunk in the mountains or anything, but just going along as fresh as children, writing down what they saw without literary devices or fanciness of expression. We made up haikus as we climbed, winding up and up now on the slopes of brush. "Rocks on the side of the cliff," I said. "Why don't they tumble down?" "Maybe that's a haiku, maybe not. It might be a little too complicated," said Jaffe. "A real haiku's got to be as simple as porridge and yet make you see the real thing. Like the greatest haiku of them all, probably, is the one that goes, 'The sparrow hops along the veranda with wet feet,' by Shiki. You see the wet footprints like a vision in your mind, and yet in those few words you also see all the rain that's been falling that day and almost smell the wet pine needles." "Let's have another. I'll make up one of my own this time. Let's see. 'Lake below, the black holes the wells make.' No, that's not a haiku, goddammit. You never can be too careful about haiku." "How about making them up real fast as you go along, spontaneously?" "Look here," he cried happily. "Mountain lupin. See the delicate blue color those little flowers have. And there's some California red poppy over there. The whole meadow's just powdered with color. Up there, by the way, is a genuine California white pine. You never see them much anymore. You sure know a lot about birds and trees and stuff. I've studied it all my life." Then also, as we went on climbing, we began getting more casual and making funnier, sillier talk. And pretty soon we got to a bend in the trail where it was suddenly glady and dark with shade, and a tremendous cataracting stream was bashing and frothing over scummy rocks and tumbling on down, and over the stream was a perfect bridge formed by a fallen snag. We got on it and lay belly down and dunked our heads down, hair wet, and drank deep as the water splashed in our faces, like sticking your head by the jet of a dam. I lay there a good long minute enjoying the sudden coolness. "This is like an advertisement for Rainier Ale," yelled Jaffe. "Let's sit a while and enjoy it." "Boy, you don't know how far we got to go yet." "Well, I'm not tired." "Well, you'll be, Tiger." Chapter 9. We went on, and I was immensely pleased with the way the trail had a kind of immortal look to it, in the early afternoon now, the way the side of the grassy hill seemed to be clouded with ancient gold dust, and bugs flipped over rocks, and the wind sighed in shimmering dances over the hot rocks, and the way the trail would suddenly come into a cool, shady part with big trees overhead, and here the light deeper, and the way the lake below us soon became a toy lake with those black well holes perfectly visible still, and the giant cloud shadows on the lake, and the tragic little road winding away where poor Morley was walking back. "Can you see Morrill down back there?" Jaffe took a long look. "I see a little cloud of dust. Maybe that's him coming back already." But it seemed that I had seen the ancient afternoon of that trail. From meadow rocks and lupin posies to sudden revisits with the roaring stream with its splashed snag bridges and undersea greenness. There was something inexpressibly broken in my heart, as though I'd lived before and walked this trail under similar circumstances with a fellow bodhisattva, but maybe on a more important journey. I felt like lying down by the side of the trail and remembering it all. The woods do that to you. They always look familiar, long lost, like the face of a long-dead relative, like an old dream, like a piece of forgotten song drifting across the water. Most of all like golden eternities of past childhood or past manhood, and all the living and the dying and the heartbreak that went on 1,000,000 years ago, and the clouds as they pass overhead seem to testify, by their own lonesome familiarity, to this feeling. Ecstasy, even, I felt, with flashes of sudden remembrance, and feeling sweaty and drowsy, I felt like sleeping and dreaming in the grass. As we got higher, we got more tired, and now, like two true mountain climbers, we weren't talking anymore and didn't have to talk, and were glad. In fact, Jaffe mentioned that, turning to me after a half-hour's silence. This is the way I like it. When you get going, there's just no need to talk, as if we were animals and just communicated by silent telepathy. So, huddled in our own thoughts, we tromped on, Jaffe using the Gazotsky trudge I mentioned, and myself finding my own true step, which was short steps, slowly, patiently going up the mountain at 1 mile an hour, so I was always 30 yards behind him, and when we had any haikus now we'd yell them fore and aft. Pretty soon we got to the top part of the trail that was a trail no more, to the incomparable dreamy meadow, which had a beautiful pond, and after that it was boulders and nothing but boulders. Only sign we have now to know which way we're going is ducks. What's ducks? See those boulders over there? See those boulders over there? Why, God, man, I see 5 miles of boulders leading up to that mountain. See the little pile of rocks on that near boulder there by the pine? That's a duck, put up by other climbers. Maybe that's one I put up myself in '54, I'm not sure. We just go from boulder to boulder from now on, keeping a sharp eye for ducks. Then we get a general idea how to wraggle along. Although, of course, we know which way we're going. That big cliff face up there is where our plateau is. Plateau? My God, you mean that ain't the top of the mountain? Of course not. After that we got a plateau, and then scree, and then more rocks, and we get to a final alpine lake no bigger than this pond, and then comes the final climb over 1,000 feet almost straight up, boy, to the top of the world, where you'll see all California and parts of Nevada, and the wind'll blow right through your pants. Ow! How long does it all take? Why, the only thing we can expect to make tonight is our camp up there on that plateau. I call it a plateau. It ain't that at all. It's a shelf between heights. But at the top and the end of the trail was such a beautiful spot, I said, "Boy, look at this." A dreamy meadow, pines at one end, the pond, the clear fresh air, the afternoon clouds rushing golden. Why don't we just sleep here tonight? I don't think I've ever seen a more beautiful park. Ah, this is nowhere. It's great, of course, but we might wake up tomorrow morning and find 3 dozen school teachers on horseback frying bacon in our backyard. Where we're going, you can bet your ass there won't be one human being, and if there is, I'll be a spotted horse's ass. Or maybe just one mountain climber or two, but I don't expect so at this time of year. You know, the snow's about to come here any time now. If it comes tonight, it's goodbye me and you. Well, goodbye, Jaffe. But let's rest here and drink some water and admire the meadow. We were feeling tired and great. We spread out in the grass and rested and swapped packs and strapped them on and were raring to go. Almost instantaneously, the grass ended and the boulders started. We got up on the first one, and from that point on, it was just a matter of jumping from boulder to boulder, gradually climbing, 5 miles up a valley of boulders, getting steeper and steeper, with immense crags on both sides forming the walls of the valley. Till near the cliff face we'd be scrambling up the boulders, it seemed. And what's behind that cliff face? There's high grass up there, shrubbery, scattered boulders, beautiful meandering creeks that have ice in them even in the afternoon, spots of snow, tremendous trees, and one boulder just about as big as 2 of Alva's cottages piled on top the other, which leans over and makes a kind of concave cave for us to camp at, lighting a big bonfire that'll throw heat against the wall. Then after that, the grass and the timber ends. That'll be at 9,000 just about. With my sneakers, it was as easy as pie to just dance nimbly from boulder to boulder. But after a while, I noticed how gracefully Jaffe was doing it, and he just ambled from boulder to boulder, sometimes in a deliberate dance with his legs crossing from right to left, and for a while I followed his every step, but then I learned it was better for me to just spontaneously pick my own boulders and make a ragged dance of my own. "The secret of this kind of climbing," said Jaffe, "is like Zen. Don't think. Just dance along. It's the easiest thing in the world, actually easier than walking on flat ground, which is monotonous. The cute little problems present themselves at each step, and yet you never hesitate, and you find yourself on some other boulder you picked out for no special reason at all, just like Zen." Which it was. We didn't talk much now. It got tiresome on the leg muscles. We spent hours, about 3, going up that long, long valley. In that time it grew to late afternoon, and the light was growing amber, and shadows were falling ominously in the valley of dry boulders. And instead, though, of making you feel scared, it gave you that immortal feeling again. The ducks were all laid out easy to see. On top of a boulder you'd stand and look ahead, and spot a duck, usually only 2 flat rocks on top of each other, maybe with one round one on top for decoration, and you aimed in that general direction. The purpose of these ducks, as laid out by all previous climbers, was to save a mile or 2 of wandering around in the immense valley. Meanwhile, our roaring creek was still at it, but thinner and more quiet now, running from the cliff face itself a mile up the valley in a big black stain I could see in the gray rock. Jumping from boulder to boulder and never falling, with a heavy pack, is easier than it sounds. You just can't fall when you get into the rhythm of the dance. I looked back down the valley sometimes and was surprised to see how high we'd come, and to see farther horizons of mountains now back there. Our beautiful trail-top park was like a little glen of the Forest of Arden. Then the climbing got steeper, the sun got redder, and pretty soon I began to see patches of snow in the shade of some rocks. We got up to where the cliff face seemed to loom over us. At one point I saw Jaffe throw down his pack and danced my way up to him. "Well, this is where we'll drop our gear and climb those few hundred feet up the side of that cliff, where you see there it's shallower, and find that camp. I remember it. In fact, you can sit here and rest or beat your bishop while I go rambling around there. I like to ramble by myself." Okay. So I sat down and changed my wet socks and changed soaking undershirt for dry one and crossed my legs and rested and whistled for about a half hour. A very pleasant occupation. And Jaffe got back and said he'd found the camp. I thought it would be a little jaunt to our resting place, but it took almost another hour to jump up the steep boulders, climb around some, get to the level of the cliff face plateau, and there, on flat grass more or less, hike about 200 yards to where a huge gray rock towered among pines. Here now the earth was a splendorous thing. Snow on the ground, in melting patches in the grass, and gurgling creeks, and the huge silent rock mountains on both sides, and a wind blowing, and the smell of heather. We forded a lovely little creek, shallow as your hand, pearl, pure, lucid water, and got to the huge rock. Here were old charred logs where other mountain climbers had camped. "And where's Matterhorn Mountain?" "You can't see it from here, but," pointing up the farther long plateau and a scree gorge twisting to the right, "around that draw and up 2 miles or so, and then we'll be at the foot of it." "Wow, heck, whoo, that'll take us a whole other day." "Not when you're traveling with me, Smith." "Well, Ridery, that's okay with me." "Okay, Smithy, and now how's about we relax and enjoy ourselves and cook up some supper and wait for old Morlery?" So we unpacked our packs and laid things out and smoked and had a good time. Now the mountains were getting that pink tinge. I mean the rocks. They were just solid rock covered with the atoms of dust accumulated there since beginningless time. In fact, I was afraid of those jagged monstrosities all around and over our heads. "They're so silent," I said. "Yeah, man, you know, to me a mountain is a Buddha. Think of the patience, hundreds of thousands of years, just sitting there being perfectly silent, and like praying for all living creatures in that silence and just waiting for us to stop all our fretting and fooling." Jaffe got out the tea, Chinese tea, and sprinkled some in a tin pot, and had the fire going meanwhile, a small one to begin with, the sun was still on us, and stuck a long stick tight down under a few big rocks and made himself something to hang the teapot on, and pretty soon the water was boiling, and he poured it out steaming into the tin pot, and we had cups of tea in our tin cups. I myself had gotten the water from the stream, which was cold and pure like snow and the crystal-lidded eyes of heaven. Therefore, the tea was by far the most pure and thirst-quenching tea I ever drank in all my life. It made you want to drink more and more. It actually quenched your thirst, and of course it swam around hot in your belly. "Now you understand the Oriental passion for tea," said Jaffe. "Remember that book I told you about? The first sip is joy, the second is gladness, the third is serenity, the fourth is madness, the fifth is ecstasy." "Just about, old buddy." That rock we were camped against was a marvel. It was 30 feet high and 30 feet at base, a perfect square almost, and twisted trees arched over it and peeked down on us. From the base it went outward, forming a concave, so if rain came we'd be partially covered. How did this immense son-of-a-bitch ever get here? It probably was left here by the retreating glacier. See over there that field of snow? Yeah, that's the glacier, what's left of it. Either that or this rock tumbled here from inconceivable prehistoric mountains we can't understand. Or maybe it just landed here when the friggin' mountain range itself burst out of the ground in the Jurassic upheaval. Ray, when you're up here, you're not sitting in a Berkeley tea room. This is the beginning and the end of the world right here. Look at all those patient Buddhas looking at us saying nothing. And you come out here by yourself, for weeks on end, just like John Muir, climb around all by myself, following the quartzite veins or making posies of flowers for my camp, or just walking around naked singing and cook my supper and laugh. Jaffe, I gotta hand it to you. You're the happiest little cat in the world and the greatest, by God you are. I'm sure glad I'm learning all this. This place makes me feel devoted, too. I mean, you know, I have a prayer. Did you know the prayer I use? What? I sit down and say, and I run all my friends and relatives and enemies one by one in this without entertaining any angers or gratitudes or anything. And I say, like Jaffe Ryder, equally empty, equally to be loved, equally a coming Buddha. Then I run on, say to David O. Selznick, equally empty, equally to be loved, equally a coming Buddha. Though I don't use names like David O. Selznick, just people I know, because when I say the words equally a coming Buddha, I want to be thinking of their eyes. Like you take Morley, his blue eyes behind those glasses. When you think equally a coming Buddha, you think of those eyes and you really do suddenly see the true secret serenity and the truth of his coming Buddhahood. Then you think of your enemy's eyes. That's great, Ray. And Jaffe took out his notebook and wrote down the prayer and shook his head in wonder. That's really, really great. I'm going to teach this prayer to the monks I meet in Japan. There's nothing wrong with you, Ray. Your only trouble is you never learned to get out to spots like this. You've let the world drown you in its horse shit, and you've been vexed. Though, as I say, comparisons are odious. But what we're saying now is true. He took his bulgur, rough-cracked wheat and dumped a couple of packages of dried vegetables in, and put it all in the pot to be ready to be boiled at dusk. We began listening for yodels of Henry Morley, which didn't come. We began to worry about him. The trouble about all this, damn it, if he fell off a boulder and broke his leg, there'd be no one to help him. It's dangerous to... I do it all by myself, but I'm pretty good. I'm a mountain goat. I'm getting hungry. Me too, damn it. I wish he gets here soon. Let's ramble around and eat snowballs and drink water and wait. We did this, investigating the upper end of the flat plateau, and came back. By now the sun was gone behind the western wall of our valley, and it was getting darker, pinker, colder. More hues of purple began to steal across the jags. The sky was deep. We even began to see pale stars, at least one or two. Suddenly we heard a distant yodel-a-hee, and Jaffe leaped up and jumped to the top of a boulder and yelled, "Hoo, hoo, hoo!" The yodel-a-hee came back. How far is he? My God, from the sound of it, he's not even started. He's not even at the beginning of the Valley of Boulders. He can never make it tonight. What'll we do? Let's go to the rock cliff and sit on the edge and call him an hour. Let's bring these peanuts and raisins and munch on him and wait. Maybe he's not so far as I think. We went over to the promontory where we could see the whole valley, and Jaffe sat down in full lotus posture, cross-legged on a rock, and took out his wooden juju prayer beads and prayed. That is, he simply held the beads in his hands, the hands upside down with thumbs touching, and stared straight ahead and didn't move a bone. I sat down as best I could on another rock, and we both said nothing and meditated. Only I meditated with my eyes closed. The silence was an intense roar. From where we were, the sound of the creek, the gurgle and slapping talk of the creek, was blocked off by rocks. We heard several more melancholy yodel-hees and answered them, but it seemed farther and farther away each time. When I opened my eyes, the pink was more purple all the time. The stars began to flash. I fell into deep meditation, felt that the mountains were indeed Buddhas and our friends, and I felt the weird sensation that it was strange that there were only 3 men in this whole immense valley. The mystic number 3, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Dharmakaya. I prayed for the safety and, in fact, the eternal happiness of poor Morley. Once I opened my eyes and saw Jaffe sitting there rigid as a rock, and I felt like laughing, he looked so funny. But the mountains were mighty solemn, and so was Jaffe, and for that matter so was I, and in fact laughter is solemn. It was beautiful. The pinkness vanished, and then it was all purple dusk, and the roar of the silence was like a wash of diamond waves going through the liquid porches of our ears, enough to soothe a man 1,000 years. I prayed for Jaffe, for his future safety and happiness and eventual Buddhahood. It was all completely serious, all completely hallucinated, all completely happy. Rocks are space, I thought, and space is illusion. I had 1,000,000 thoughts. Jaffe had his. I was amazed at the way he meditated with his eyes open, and I was mostly humanly amazed that this tremendous little guy who eagerly studied Oriental poetry and anthropology and ornithology and everything else in the books, and was a tough little adventurer of trails and mountains, should also suddenly whip out his pitiful, beautiful wooden prayer beads and solemnly pray there, like an old-fashioned saint of the desert, certainly, but so amazing to see it in America with its steel mills and airfields. The world ain't so bad when you got Jaffes, I thought, and felt glad. All the aching muscles and the hunger in my belly were bad enough, and the surrounding dark rocks, the fact that there is nothing there to soothe you with kisses and soft words, but just to be sitting there meditating and praying for the world with another earnest young man. 'Twere good enough to have been born just to die, as we all are. Something will come of it in the milky ways of eternity, stretching in front of all our phantom unjaundiced eyes, friends. I felt like telling Jaffe everything I thought, but I knew it didn't matter, and moreover he knew it anyway, and silence is the golden mountain. "Yodel-hee," sang Morley, and now it was dark, and Jaffe said, "Well, from the looks of things he's still far away. He has enough sense to pitch his own camp down there tonight, so let's go back to our camp and cook supper." "Okay." And we yelled "hoo" a couple of times reassuringly and gave up poor Morrill for the night. He did have enough sense, we knew, and as it turned out he did, and pitched his camp wrapped up in his 2 blankets on top of the air mattress, and slept the night out in that incomparably happy meadow with the pond and the pines, telling us about it when he finally reached us the next day. Chapter 10. I rousted about and got a lot of little pieces of wood to make kindling for the fire, and then I went around gathering bigger pieces, and finally I was hunting out huge logs, easy to find all over the place. We had a fire that Morley must have seen from 5 miles away, except we were way up behind the cliff face, cut off from his view. It cast mighty blasts of heat against our cliff. The cliff absorbed it and threw it back. We were in a hot room, except that the ends of our noses were nippy from sticking them out of that area to get firewood and water. Jaffe put the bulgur in the pot with water and started it boiling and stirred it around, and meanwhile busied himself with the mixings for the chocolate pudding, and started boiling that in a separate smaller pot out of my knapsack. He also brewed a fresh pot of tea. Then he whipped out his double set of chopsticks, and pretty soon we had our supper ready and laughed over it. It was the most delicious supper of all time. Up out of the orange glow of our fire, you could see immense systems of uncountable stars, either as individual blazers or in low Venus droppers, or vast Milky Ways incommensurate with human understanding, all cold blue silver. But our food and our fire was pink and goodies. And true to what Jaffee had predicted, I had absolutely not a jot of appetite for alcohol. I'd forgotten all about it. The altitude was too high, the exercise too heavy, the air too brisk. The air itself was enough to get your drunk-ass drunk. It was a tremendous supper. Food is always better eaten in doleful little pinchfuls off the ends of chopsticks. No gobbling. The reason why Darwin's law of survival applies best to China. If you don't know how to handle a chopstick and stick it in that family pot with the best of 'em, you'll starve. I ended up flopping it all up with my forefinger anyhow. Supper done, Jaffee assiduously got to scraping the pots with a wire scraper and got me to bring water, which I did, dipping a leftover can from other campers into the fire pool of stars, and came back with a snowball to boot, and Jaffee washed the dishes in pre-boiled water. Usually I don't wash my dishes, I just wrap 'em up in my blue bandana, 'cause it really doesn't matter. Though they don't appreciate this little bit of wisdom in the horse soap building thar on Madison Avenue, that English firm, Erber and Erber, what all. Damn hell and upside down, boy, I'll be as tight as Dick's hat band if I don't feel like taking out my star map and seeing what the lay of the pack is tonight. That hound's a pack up there more uncountable than all your favorite Serengami Sutries, boy. So he whips out his star map and turns it around a little and adjusts and looks and says, "It's exactly 8:48 p.m. How do you know? Sirius wouldn't be where Sirius is if it wasn't 8:48 p.m. You know what I like about you, Ray? You've woke me up to the true language of this country, which is the language of the working men, railroad men, loggers. Did you ever hear them guys talk? I sure did. I had a guy, an oil rig driver, truck, picked me up in Houston, Texas one night round about midnight after some little faggot who owned some motel courts called, of all things, and rather appropriately, my dear, dandy courts, had left me off and said, "If you can't get a ride, come on in, sleep on my floor." So I wait about an hour in the empty road, and here comes this rig, and it's driven by a Cherokee, he said he was, but his name was Johnson or Allie Reynolds or some damn thing. And as he talked, starting in with a speech like, "Well, boy, I left my mammy's cabin before you knew the smell of the river and came west to drive myself mad in the East Texas oil field," and all kinds of rhythmic talk, and with every bang of rhythm he'd ram at his clutch and his various gears and pop up the truck and had her roaring down the road about 70 miles an hour with momentum only when his story got rolling with him. Magnificent. That's what I call poetry. That's what I mean. You ought to hear old Bernie Byers talk up in the Skagit country, Ray. You just gotta go up there. Okay, I will. Jaffee, kneeling there studying his star map, leaning forward slightly to peek up through the overhanging gnarled old rock country trees, with his goatee and all, looked, with that mighty graw-faced rock behind him, exactly like the vision I had of the old Zen masters of China out in the wilderness. He was leaning forward on his knees, upward-looking, as if with a holy sutra in his hands. Pretty soon he went to the snowbank and brought back the chocolate pudding, which was now ice-cold and absolutely delicious beyond words. We ate it all up. Maybe we ought to leave some for Morley. It won't keep. It'll melt in the morning sun. As the fire stopped roaring and just got to be red coals, but big ones, 6 feet long, the night interposed its icy crystal feel more and more, but with the smell of smoking logs it was as delicious as chocolate pudding. For a while I went on a little walk by myself, out by the shallow iced creek, and sat meditating against a stump of dirt, and the huge mountain walls on both sides of our valley were silent masses. Too cold to do this more than a minute. As I came back, our orange fire casting its glow on the big rock, and Jaffee kneeling and peering up at the sky, and all of it 10,000 feet above the gnashing world, was a picture of peace and good sense. There was another aspect of Jaffee that amazed me, his tremendous and tender sense of charity. He was always giving things, always practicing what the Buddhists call the paramita of dana, the perfection of charity. Now when I came back and sat down by the fire, he said, "Well, Smith, it's about time you owned a set of juju beads. You can have these." And he handed me the brown wood beads run together over a strong string, with the string, black and shiny, coming out at the large bead at the end in a pretty loop. "Oh, you can't give me something like this. These things come from Japan, don't they?" "I've got another set of black ones. Smith, that prayer you gave me tonight is worth that set of juju beads, but you can have it anyway." A few minutes later, he cleaned out the rest of the chocolate pudding, but made sure that I got most of it. Then when he laid boughs over the rock of our clearing and the poncho over that, he made sure his sleeping bag was farther away from the fire than mine so I would be sure to be warm. He was always practicing charity. In fact, he taught me, and a week later I was giving him nice new undershirts I'd discovered at the Goodwill store. He'd turn right around and make me a gift of a plastic container to keep food in. For a joke, I'd give him a gift of a huge flower from Alva's yard. Solemnly, a day later, he'd bring me a little bouquet of flowers picked in the street plots of Berkeley. "And you can keep the sneakers, too," he said. "I've got another pair older than those, but just as good." "Oh, I can't be taking all your things." "Smith, you don't realize it's a privilege to practice giving presents to others." The way he did it was charming. There was nothing glittery and Christmassy about it, but almost sad. And sometimes his gifts were old beat-up things, but they had the charm of usefulness and the sadness of his giving. We rolled into our sleeping bags, it was freezing cold now, about 11 o'clock, and talked a while more before one of us just didn't answer from the pillow, and pretty soon we were asleep. While he snored, I woke up and just lay flat back with my eyes to the stars and thanked God I'd come on this mountain climb. My legs felt better, my whole body felt strong. The crack of the dying logs was like Jaffe making little comments on my happiness. I looked at him. His head was buried way under inside his tucked-down bag. His little huddled form was the only thing I could see from miles of darkness that was so packed and concentrated with eager desire to be good. I thought, what a strange thing is man. Like in the Bible it says, "Who knoweth the spirit of man that looketh upward?" This poor kid 10 years younger than I am is making me look like a fool, forgetting all the ideals and joys I knew before, in my recent years of drinking and disappointment. What does he care if he hasn't got any money? He doesn't need any money. All he needs is his rucksack, with those little plastic bags of dried food and a good pair of shoes, and off he goes and enjoys the privileges of a millionaire in surroundings like this. And what gouty millionaire could get up this rock anyhow? It took us all day to climb. And I promised myself that I would begin a new life. All over the West and the mountains in the East and the desert, I'll tramp with a rucksack and make it the pure way. I went to sleep after burying my nose under the sleeping bag, and woke up around dawn shivering. The ground cold had seeped through the poncho and through the bag, and my ribs were up against a damper damp than the damp of a cold bed. My breath was coming out in steams. I rolled over to the other ribs and slept some more. My dreams were pure cold dreams like ice water, happy dreams, no nightmares. When I woke up again, and the sunlight was pristine orange, pouring through the crags to the east and down through our fragrant pine boughs, I felt like I did when I was a boy, and it was time to get up and go play all day Saturday, in overalls. Jaffe was already up, singing and blowing on his hands at a small fire. White frost was on the ground. He rushed out away and yelled out, "Yodelay-hee!" And by God, we heard it come right back at us from Morley, closer than the night before. "He's on his way now. Wake up, Smith, and have a hot cup of tea. Do you good." I got up and fished my sneakers out of the sleeping bag where they'd been kept warm all night, and put them on, and put on my beret, and jumped up and ran a few blocks in the grass. The shallow creek was iced over, except in the middle where a rill of gurgles rolled like tinkly-tinkly. I fell down on my belly and took a deep drink, wetting my face. There's no feeling in the world like washing your face in cold water on a mountain morning. Then I went back, and Jaffe was heating up the remains of last night's supper, and it was still good. Then we went out on the edge of the cliff and hooed at Morley, and suddenly we could see him, a tiny figure 2 miles down the valley of boulders, moving like a little animate being in the immense void. "That little dot down there is our witty friend Morley," said Jaffe in his funny resounding voice of a lumberjack. In about 2 hours, Morley was within talking distance of us and started right in talking as he negotiated the final boulders to where we were sitting in the now warm sun on a rock waiting. "The Ladies' Aid Society says I should come up and see if you boys would like to have blue ribbons pinned on your shirts. They say there's plenty of pink lemonade left and Lord Mountbatten is getting mighty impatient. You think they'll investigate the source of that recent trouble in the Mideast, or learn to appreciate coffee better? I should think with a couple of literary gentlemen like you two, they should learn to mind their manners." And so on, for no reason at all, yakking in the happy blue morning sky over rocks with his slaking grin, sweating a little from the long morning's work. "Well, Morley, you ready to climb Matterhorn?" "I'm ready just as soon as I can change these wet socks." Chapter 11. At about noon we started out, leaving our big packs at the camp where nobody was likely to be till next year anyway, and went up the Scree Valley with just some food and first aid kits. The valley was longer than it looked. In no time at all it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun was getting that later, more golden look, and a wind was rising, and I began to think, by gosh, how are we ever going to climb that mountain tonight? I put it to Jaffe, who said, "You're right, we'll have to hurry. Why don't we just forget it and go on home?" "Aw, come on, Tiger, we'll make a run up that hill and then we'll go home." The valley was long and long and long, and at the top end it got very steep, and I began to be a little afraid of falling down. The rocks were small, and it got slippery, and my ankles were in pain from yesterday's muscle strain anyway. But Morley kept walking and talking, and I noticed his tremendous endurance. Jaffe took his pants off so he could look just like an Indian, stark naked, except for a jockstrap, and hiked almost a quarter-mile ahead of us, sometimes waiting a while to give us time to catch up, then went on, moving fast, wanting to climb the mountain today. Morley came second, about 50 yards ahead of me all the way. I was in no hurry. Then as it got later afternoon, I went faster and decided to pass Morley and join Jaffe. Now we were at about 11,000 feet, and it was cold, and there was a lot of snow, and to the east we could see immense snow-capped ranges and hooey levels of valley land below them. We were already practically on top of California. At one point I had to scramble, like the others, on a narrow ledge around a butte of rock, and it really scared me. The fall was 100 feet, enough to break your neck, with another little ledge letting you bounce a minute preparatory to a nice goodbye 1,000-foot drop. The wind was whipping now. Yet that whole afternoon, even more than the other, was filled with old premonitions or memories, as though I'd been there before, scrambling on these rocks, for other purposes more ancient, more serious, more simple. We finally got to the foot of Matterhorn, where there was a most beautiful small lake unknown to the eyes of most men in this world, seen by only a handful of mountain climbers. A small lake at 11,000 some odd feet, with snow on the edges of it and beautiful flowers and a beautiful meadow, an alpine meadow, flat and dreamy, upon which I immediately threw myself and took my shoes off. Jaffe'd been there a half hour when I made it, and it was cold now and his clothes were on again. Morley came up behind us, smiling. We sat there looking up at the imminent steep scree slope of the final crag of Matterhorn. "That don't look much. We can do it," I said, glad now. "No, Ray, that's more than it looks. Do you realize that's 1,000 feet more?" "That much? Unless we make a run up there double time, we'll never make it down again to our camp before nightfall, and never make it down to the car at the lodge before tomorrow morning at midnight." "Phew." "I'm tired," said Morley. "I don't think I'll try it." "Well, that's right," I said. "The whole purpose of mountain climbing, to me, isn't just to show off you can get to the top. It's getting out to this wild country." "Well, I'm going to go," said Jaffe. "Well, if you're going to go, I'm going with you." "Morley? I don't think I can make it. I'll wait here." And that wind was strong, too strong. I felt that as soon as we'd be a few hundred feet up the slope, it might hamper our climbing. Jaffe took a small pack of peanuts and raisins and said, "This'll be our gasoline, boy. You ready, Ray, to make a double-time run?" "Ready. What would I say to the boys in the place if I came all this way only to give up at the last minute?" "It's late, so let's hurry." Jaffe started up, walking very rapidly, and then even running sometimes, where the climb had to be to the right or left along ridges of scree. Scree is long landslides of rocks and sand, very difficult to scramble through, always little avalanches going on. At every few steps we took, it seemed we were going higher and higher on a terrifying elevator. I gulped when I turned around to look back and see all of the state of California, it would seem, stretching out in 3 directions under huge blue skies, with frightening planetary space clouds and immense vistas of distant valleys and even plateaus, and for all I know, whole Nevadas out there. It was terrifying to look down and see Morley a dreaming spot by the little lake waiting for us. Oh, why didn't I stay with old Henry, I thought. I now began to be afraid to go any higher from sheer fear of being too high. I began to be afraid of being blown away by the wind. All the nightmares I'd ever had about falling off mountains and precipitous buildings ran through my head in perfect clarity. Also, with every 20 steps we took upward, we both became completely exhausted. "That's just because of the high altitude now, Ray," said Jaffe, sitting beside me, panting. "So have raisins and peanuts, and you'll see what kick it gives you." And each time it gave us such a tremendous kick, we both jumped up without a word and climbed another 20-30 steps. Then sat down again, panting, sweating in the cold wind, high on top of the world, our noses sniffling like the noses of little boys playing late Saturday afternoon their final little games in winter. Now the wind began to howl like the wind in movies about the Shroud of Tibet. The steepness began to be too much for me. I was afraid now to look back any more. I peeked. I couldn't even make out Morley by the tiny lake. "Hurry it up," yelled Jaffe from 100 feet ahead. "It's getting awfully late." I looked up to the peak. It was right there. I'd be there in 5 minutes. "Only a half hour to go," yelled Jaffe. I didn't believe it. In 5 minutes of scrambling angrily upward, I fell down and looked up, and it was still just as far away. What I didn't like about that peak top was that the clouds of all the world were blowing right through it like fog. "Wouldn't see anything up there anyway," I muttered. Oh, why did I ever let myself get into this? Jaffe was way ahead of me now. He'd left the peanuts and raisins with me. It was with a kind of lonely solemnity now he had decided to rush to the top if it killed him. He didn't sit down anymore. Soon he was a whole football field, 100 yards ahead of me, getting smaller. I looked back, and like Lot's wife, that did it. "This is too high!" I yelled to Jaffe in a panic. He didn't hear me. I raced a few more feet up and fell exhausted on my belly, slipping back just a little. "This is too high!" I yelled. I was really scared. Supposing I'd start to slip back for good, these screes might start sliding any time anyway. That damn mountain goat Jaffe, I could see him jumping through the foggy air up ahead from rock to rock. Up, up, just the flash of his boot bottoms. How can I keep up with a maniac like that? But with nutty desperation I followed him. Finally I came to a kind of ledge where I could sit at a level angle instead of having to cling not to slip. And I nudged my whole body inside the ledge just to hold me there tight so the wind would not dislodge me, and I looked down and around, and I had had it. "I'm staying here," I yelled to Jaffe. "Come on, Smith, only another 5 minutes. I only got 100 feet to go." "I'm staying right here. It's too high." He said nothing and went on. I saw him collapse and pant and get up and make his run again. I nudged myself closer into the ledge and closed my eyes and thought, oh, what a life this is. Why do we have to be born in the first place? And only so we can have our poor, gentle flesh laid out to such impossible horrors as huge mountains and rock and empty space. And with horror I remembered the famous Zen saying, "When you get to the top of a mountain, keep climbing." The saying made my hair stand on end. It had been such cute poetry sitting on Alva's straw mats. Now it was enough to make my heart pound and my heart bleed for being born at all. In fact, when Jaffe gets to the top of that crag, he will keep climbing the way the wind's blowing. Well, this old philosopher is staying right here, and I closed my eyes. Besides, I thought, rest and be kind. You don't have to prove anything. Suddenly, I heard a beautiful broken yodel of a strange musical and mystical intensity in the wind, and looked up, and it was Jaffe standing on top of Matterhorn Peak letting out his triumphant mountain-conquering, Buddha mountain-smashing song of joy. It was beautiful. It was funny, too, up here on the not-so-funny top of California and in all that rushing fog. But I had to hand it to him, the guts, the endurance, the sweat, and now the crazy human singing. Whipped cream on top of ice cream. I didn't have enough strength to answer his yodel. He ran around up there and went out of sight to investigate the little flat top of some kind, he said, that ran a few feet west and then dropped sheer back down maybe as far as I care to the sawdust floors of Virginia City. It was insane. I could hear him yelling at me, but I just nudged farther in my protective nook, trembling. I looked down at the small lake where Morley was lying on his back with a blade of grass in his mouth, and said out loud, "Now there's the karma of these three men here. Jaffy Ryder gets to his triumphant mountaintop and makes it. I almost make it and have to give up and huddle in a bloody cave. But the smartest of them all is that poet's poet lying down there with his knees crossed to the sky, chewing on a flower, dreaming by a gurgling plage. God damn it, they'll never get me up here again."